The old house stood silent at the edge of the street, but tonight something felt different. David had decided to renovate the basement. He thought it would only be a weekend project, just breaking some walls, cleaning dust, and maybe finding old pipes. He carried his hammer and tools down the narrow wooden stairs. The air felt colder here, heavier than upstairs. Dust floated in the flashlight beam, and the old stone walls seemed to breathe with him. He swung the hammer against a cracked part of the wall. The stone broke easily, but then he heard it. A sound, unlike any he had heard before, not wood, not stone, not pipe. It echoed like metal, hollow and alive. David froze. He leaned closer, pressed his ear against the wall, and there it was again. A faint thump, like a slow heartbeat. His hands trembled, but curiosity pulled him forward. He broke more of the wall, each strike making the strange sound louder. Behind the stone was not dirt or foundation, but smooth metal, silver gray with faint glowing lines like veins of light. It didn't look old, it didn't look broken. It looked waiting. David's breath grew short. He touched the surface and warmth spread into his fingers, not cold like normal steel, but almost alive. For a moment he pulled back, thinking maybe it was some old tank or a power line. But no, this was something else. The glow pulsed gently under his touch, as if answering him. David whispered to himself, "What is this?" His voice shaking in the empty basement. He looked around, but the silence swallowed his words. He kept digging, stone and cement falling away until more of the object was revealed. Now it was clear, a round shape, curved perfectly, smooth with no bolts, no seams, no scratches. The lines of light traced across the surface, meeting in the center where a faint oval window appeared. David's heart raced faster. He felt both fear and wonder twisting inside him. Suddenly, a soft hiss filled the basement, not from his tools, not from the air, but from the object itself. The glow grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm like it was alive. David stumbled back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. He had uncovered something buried deep, something not meant to be touched. The basement, no longer, felt like his. The air was heavy with an invisible presence. He wanted to run upstairs, shut the door, and pretend he had never found it, but his legs wouldn't move. His eyes were fixed on the object. On the way, the light seemed to grow stronger the longer he stared. It was not just metal. It was a pod. A deep hum rose from within, vibrating through the floor, through his chest, like a voice he couldn't understand. David clutched his hammer tightly, as if it could protect him from the unknown. The wall around the pod crumbled more, revealing its full curve, round and smooth, glowing like something from another world. He realized the truth. This wasn't man-made. This was something buried for years, maybe centuries. The hum slowed, then stopped. The glow dimmed slightly, leaving the basement in half-dark. David's breath echoed loud, his heart still pounding. But in the silence, one more sound reached him, soft and weak. A whisper from inside the pod, too faint to understand, but enough to freeze the blood in his veins. David staggered back, his flashlight trembling on the floor. The basement, once only a forgotten storage place, had become something else entirely. A door to a mystery bigger than he could imagine, and deep inside the pod something was waiting for him, awake, watching, alive. David couldn't sleep that night. His mind replayed the glow, the hum, and that faint whisper from the pod. Even when he closed his eyes, he saw the blue lines of light pulsing in the dark. At dawn, he forced himself back into the basement, his hands shaking as he carried a lantern and tools. The air felt heavier than yesterday, thick with something unseen, like the basement itself was alive. The pod waited in silence, half buried in the broken wall. David brushed away the remaining stone, his fingers trembling each time they touched the strange surface. It was warm again, almost like skin, and when he pressed harder, the faint glow sparked under his hand. The lines of light brightened, traveling across the curved surface until the whole pod shimmered faintly in the shadows. He whispered to himself, "It's not just metal. It's something else." The oval window he had noticed before now seemed clearer, a faint mist clouding the inside. David wiped it gently, his heart thundering. And then he saw her, a face delicate and alien yet strikingly beautiful. Her skin faintly glowed pale silver, her hair floated like strands of night, and her eyes, closed but restless, moved as, if in dream. David stumbled back, dropping his tool, the clatter echoing through the basement. This wasn't a machine, this was a coffin, or maybe a cradle. He leaned closer again, staring in disbelief. She looked fragile, small compared to him, but her presence filled the space with strange weight. He noticed markings along the pod, not letters, not numbers, but glowing symbols carved into the surface. The symbols flickered as if alive, rearranging slightly before his eyes, like the pod was aware of his presence. Suddenly a hiss escaped the pod, white steam curling into the air. The window fogged, then cleared again, revealing her more clearly. Her chest rose and fell faintly. She was breathing. David's throat went dry, he whispered. She's alive. Fear shot through him, but wonder too. What was she doing here, hidden under his house? Who buried her, and why? He glanced at the stairs. Part of him wanted to run, call the police or maybe scientists, but another part of him couldn't leave. Something inside told him that if he left, she might vanish forever. The symbols glowed brighter. The pod hummed again, this time faster, like a heartbeat matching. David touched the glass with trembling fingers, and then it happened. Her eyes opened. They glowed faintly blue, not human, not earthly, but filled with something deep. She didn't move, just stared at him, weak but unblinking. David's breath caught in his chest. He felt as if the entire basement closed in around him. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't think. Only look back into those glowing eyes. A sound filled his head. Not from the air, not from his ears, but inside his mind. It was a single word, alien yet strangely clear. Chosen. David gasped and fell back, dropping his lantern, the light rolling across the floor. He pressed his hand against his temple, the word still echoing inside his skull. When he looked up again, the pod's glow was fading, as if it had given all its strength just to wake her for a moment. Her eyes closed once more, and the basement grew silent again. David sat on the floor, his heart racing so fast he thought it might break. He realized now that the pod was not just an object, it was alive in some way, and it had chosen him. But chosen for what, he didn't know. All he knew was that his life, once quiet and ordinary, was no longer his own. And in the silence of the basement, the pod pulsed faintly again, waiting for what came next. The basement felt different now. No longer just a storage space of dust and wood. It was a chamber holding a secret older than his family home. David sat on the cold floor, staring at the pod that pulsed faintly like a heart. He couldn't look. Away from the faint glow behind the glass where the alien girl slept, her earlier words still echoed in his head. Chosen. He wondered if it was real, or just his tired mind inventing things, but deep inside, he knew it was not his imagination. That word had weight, like it belonged to her, not to him. The silence broke with another hiss, steam curling out of the pod's edges. The glowing symbols along the surface lit up again, brighter. This time David stepped back, his lantern shaking in his hand. The hum returned, steady and deep, filling the basement with invisible pressure. The oval window cleared slowly, and her face appeared again. Her eyes opened wider than before, glowing faint blue. This time she did not just stare, she moved. Her delicate hand pressed weakly against the inside of the glass. David's breath caught. He lifted his own hand without thinking. His palm rested on the cool glass exactly where hers was. A sudden rush filled his head. Not sound, not sight, but visions. Stars spinning, fire across the sky. Screams in languages he didn't know. He saw her running, chased by shadows with burning red eyes. He saw her fall, her body placed into the pod by trembling hands, and then darkness, silence, and endless waiting. The vision ended with her eyes, staring directly into his as if begging. David stumbled back, gasping for air, his head pounding with the images. The girl inside the pod blinked slowly, her lips parting as if trying to speak. A soft hum came from her throat. Not words he knew, But something close to music, it carried sadness but also hope. A melody that shook him to his core. The pod hissed louder, seams glowing as if unlocking. David panicked. Part of him wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. He could only watch as the front of the pod cracked open with a faint click. 3. Glass pulled back slightly, letting a rush of cool air spill into the basement. The alien girl gasped weakly, her chest rising faster. Her eyes flickered, her body trembling as if she was fighting to wake. David dropped to his knees beside the pod, unsure if he should help or stay back. Every instinct screamed that she was fragile, that if he touched her wrong she might break. Finally, the glass slid fully open with a hiss. Her body slumped slightly forward, her arms trembling with weakness. David reached out on pure instinct and caught her before she could fall. Her skin was warm, softer than he expected, glowing, faintly in his hands. She blinked up at him, lips moving slowly. The sound that came out was broken, but he heard it in his mind clearer than air. Safe. That single word pierced through him. Heavy with trust and desperation, David swallowed hard, holding her carefully. He had no answers, no understanding of what was happening. But one thing was certain. She was no longer just sleeping inside the pod. She was awake, alive, and in his arms. And as her glowing eyes met his again, David felt a truth heavier than the basement walls. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she had chosen him. And from this moment, his life was no longer his own. The first awakening had begun. David held her carefully, his arms tense, his breath uneven. The alien girl was lighter than he expected, her body trembling with weakness. Her skin glowed faintly like moonlight on water, her eyes flickering open and shut as if every breath was a battle. He lowered her gently onto the floor, afraid she might slip back into the pod if he let go too soon. She whispered again, her voice faint, not through his ears but inside his head. It wasn't English, but somehow he understood one word. Help. David's heart clenched. He had no idea what to do. He was no doctor, no scientist, just a man who wanted to fix his basement. The glowing symbols on the pod shifted once more, pulsing like they were alive. David glanced back at it, realizing the pod itself was still connected to her somehow. It wasn't just a machine. It was like a cradle, a protector, a life support system. And it seemed to react whenever he touched her, as if acknowledging him. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. The moment their skin touched, a wave of energy surged into him, not painful, but overwhelming. His head spun as images filled his mind. He saw stars stretching across space, vast and endless, ships burning, worlds torn apart by war. In the middle of it all, he saw her, standing tall, though small, her people behind her, their faces filled with fear. He saw them falling one by one, chased by monstrous figures that looked nothing like humans. Then he saw her being sealed into the pod, voices crying in sorrow, hands trembling as they placed her inside. The final image was of the pod sinking into darkness, hidden, waiting, until his hammer broke through the wall. David gasped, pulling his hand back, sweat dripping from his forehead. The girl blinked at him, her faint lips forming another word in his mind, bond. He didn't understand the depth of it, but he felt it, like something invisible had tied them together. She tried to rise, but her legs trembled and she collapsed against him. David steadied her, his arms shaking, his heart pounding too fast. It was strange, holding someone not human, someone from the stars, yet she felt so real, so fragile. He couldn't let go. Not now, not after everything he had seen. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed outside. The house seemed to shiver. David's head snapped upward. Footsteps, or maybe something heavier, moved in the night above. The girl stiffened, her glowing eyes wide with fear. She grabbed his wrist weakly, her thought rushing into his mind. They come. His chest tightened. Whoever she was running from, they had followed. David realized the pod wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a beacon, and breaking the wall must have awakened it. Now others knew she was here and they were coming. He held her tighter, whispering out loud though his voice shook, "I won't let them take you." The words felt foolish, but they were the only promise he could make. She stared into his eyes, and for the first time she smiled faintly. It wasn't just gratitude. It was trust, as if she believed him more than anyone else in the galaxy. The basement hummed again, the pod glowing brighter, the symbols racing faster across its surface. It was preparing for something, maybe to defend her, maybe to warn him. But David already knew whatever connection had formed between them was not just chance, it was destiny. And as the sound of movement grew louder above, the shocking truth hit him. He was no longer just a man fixing his basement. He was standing at the edge of a war he didn't understand, and the only thing protecting her now was him. The night dragged on heavy and restless. The house above creaked as if strangers moved quietly through the dark. David sat in the basement with the alien girl leaning against him, her body weak, her breath shallow but steady. The pod glowed, faintly in the corner, its light softer now, like it was resting after protecting her. But the silence outside was dangerous, too quiet, too careful. He listened for footsteps, for whispers, for anything that might tell him who or what had arrived. Every shadow seemed alive. Every creak in the wood above sent a chill down his back. The alien girl stirred, her glowing eyes opening slightly, fear trembling in them. She clutched his wrist with her delicate hand and whispered into his mind, "Hide." David nodded quickly, pulling an old blanket from the corner and wrapping it around her small frame. He carried her toward a shelf stacked with dusty boxes, slipping her carefully behind it. She pressed close, trying to make herself invisible. Her trust in him was clear, and that trust burned deep in his chest, giving him courage. A sudden sound broke the silence. Floorboards creaked above, heavier this time, deliberate. David froze, his heart hammering. The basement door at the top of the stairs groaned slowly, the rusty hinges crying as it opened. Light spilled in from the hall, a thin strip across the steps. David held his breath, his eyes fixed on the shadow stretching down the stairs. The shape was tall, too tall for a human, its movement slow but purposeful. The figure descended step by step, the sound of each footfall echoing like thunder in David's ears. His fists clenched, but he had nothing to fight with except a hammer lying near the pod. The alien girl's eyes widened from the shadows, her hand reaching out weakly toward him, as if to warn him. The figure finally stepped into the basement light. David's heart stopped. It was no man. Its skin shimmered dark gray, its face long and alien, eyes glowing faint red like burning coals. Its body was covered in armor that seemed fused to its skin. It scanned the basement with a low growl, its gaze landing on the glowing pod. David realized at once. This was a hunter, one of the monsters from her vision. The hunter hissed, clicking its claws against the wall as if searching for a trail. David's breath grew shallow. He stayed still, hoping the boxes and shadows hid the girl completely. The pod's glow pulsed faintly and the hunter snarled, stepping closer. It had tracked the signal, and now it would not leave until it found her. David's hand closed around the hammer, sweat dripping from his palm. He knew he was no match, but he couldn't let it see her. The hunter bent down, inspecting the pod, growling in a strange guttural language. It raised its clawed hand, ready to strike the pod apart. Before it could, David stood, his body shaking but his voice loud. "Stop!" he shouted, his own echo bouncing across the walls. The hunter turned sharply, its red eyes narrowing. On him it snarled, its mouth opening wide to reveal sharp teeth that glistened under the lantern light. David's knees trembled, but he did not move away. Behind the boxes, the girl's glowing eyes locked on him, filled with fear and something deeper. Faith. The hunter growled, stepping closer. Claws raised, David lifted the hammer though his arm shook, his voice cracking as he whispered, "You'll have to go through me." The room fell silent again, the pod glowing brighter as if reacting to his defiance. The hunter paused, tilting its head, surprised by the human's boldness. It had expected fear, not resistance. And in that hesitation, David knew the battle had only just begun. The basement seemed too small, too fragile to hold the weight of what was happening. David stood frozen with his hammer raised, facing the first hunter whose glowing red eyes burned through the shadows. The alien girl hid behind the boxes, clutching her chest. Her weak breaths, sharp with fear. The pod pulsed brighter as if warning them both, sending faint waves of energy through the room. The hunter took one slow step forward, claws glinting in the lantern light. Its guttural growl rolled low, a sound meant to frighten. David's legs shook, but he stayed firm, his heart pounding so loud it echoed in his ears. He whispered to himself, not her, never her, and tightened his grip on the hammer. Suddenly, another sound thundered outside. Heavy footsteps, the crack of branches breaking, and voices not human. The house shuddered as if something massive landed nearby. The girl's eyes widened, glowing brighter as her voice entered his mind. More. Her fear spilled into him, like ice water making his body stiffen. The first hunter hissed and turned toward the stairs, its body alert. From above came the echo of claws on wood, slow and deliberate. The basement door burst wider, and two more hunters stepped into the stairwell, their red eyes glowing like fire in the dark. They moved with chilling precision, their armor shifting with faint metallic clicks. David's chest tightened. 3 of them now, maybe more outside. He looked back at the girl, her trembling hands pressed against the boxes, silently begging him not to give up. The pod flared suddenly, symbols racing across its surface, the hum vibrating stronger through the ground. It was alive again, responding to the danger as if preparing to act. The first hunter roared, pointing its claw at the pod. The other 2 hissed in agreement, their guttural voices echoing like drums. David realized. They weren't here for him, they were here for her, and they wouldn't leave until they had her. But he also knew one thing. He couldn't let them win. He lifted the hammer higher, stepping between the hunters and the pod. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "If you want it, you'll have to kill me first." The hunters tilted their heads, confused by his defiance. One lunged suddenly, its claws slashing through the air. David dodged barely, the claw cutting through wood and stone like paper. His heart raced, sweat dripping into his eyes. But his grip on the hammer never loosened. He swung with all his strength, the hammer crashing against the hunter's armored arm. The strike made the creature stagger, but only for a second. It snarled louder now. The girl gasped, her faint voice echoing in his mind. Protect. Her trust flowed into him like fire, giving him courage he didn't know he had. The pod responded too, its hum rising into a high pitch, the symbols glowing almost blindingly. The hunters stepped back slightly, wary now, as if the pod itself was a weapon. Outside, more heavy footsteps shook the ground, more shadows moving. David realized there weren't just 3 hunters. There was a pack. He glanced at the girl, her glowing eyes locked onto his. This was only the beginning. The real storm was still coming. The first hunter roared again, louder than before, its voice shaking dust from the ceiling. The others joined, their red eyes burning, their claws scraping against the stone floor. David stood his ground, hammer in hand, heart screaming in his chest. He was one man, but he would not let them take her. And as the pod's glow reached its brightest yet, filling the entire basement with blue light, David understood the truth. The hunters were not just searching, they were invading. And now the battle had truly begun. The hunters had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The basement glowed with the strange light of the pod, its symbols racing across the surface like living fire. The hunters hissed and circled, their red eyes narrowing as they sensed the energy building. David stood in front of the alien girl, sweat dripping down his face. His hammer raised, though his hands shook. He knew he could not fight them all, but he also knew he would rather die than let them touch her. The girl's voice reached into his mind again, faint but urgent. Trust. Her small glowing hand, stretched out from behind the boxes, trembling but firm. David glanced at her, then back at the hunters, and finally lowered one hand to grasp hers. The instant their skin touched, something inside him shifted. A surge of warmth spread from her palm into his chest, not burning but alive. It filled his veins like fire and light, steadying his breath, making his legs stronger. Visions flooded him again, this time clearer. Not just war and darkness, but her people smiling, her world filled with color and peace. She had been someone important, a protector, perhaps even a leader. and now she was looking at him with the same trust she once gave to her own. David gasped, his hammer trembling less in his grip. The hunter snarled, stepping closer, confused by the glow that now pulsed faintly around his body. The girl's voice whispered again, "We, together." He nodded without thinking, the words feeling right. One hunter lunged suddenly, its claws flashing toward him. David swung the hammer with all his might, and this time the strike landed harder than before. The force sent the creature staggering back, a deep crack splitting its armor. David stared in shock, realizing her energy was flowing through him. The girl pushed herself up from behind the boxes, her legs trembling but her eyes steady. She raised her hand, and the pod responded instantly, light rushing from its symbols into her. The air shook as small objects in the basement lifted into the air. Stones, tools, even dust swirling in circles. Her power was real, though weak from her long sleep. It was enough to make the hunters pause. David stood taller now, his fear replaced. With something fiercer, he looked at her and she looked back. A silent agreement passing between them. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The hunters hissed louder, their movements sharper, as if realizing their prey was no longer helpless. One stepped forward, claws raised, but before it could strike. The girl's voice rang in David's mind like thunder. "No." Her hand glowed bright, and a wave of force pushed outward, knocking the hunter back into the wall. The ground trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. David's jaw dropped, staring at her in awe. But the effort cost her strength, her body swayed, and she nearly collapsed. David rushed to her side, catching her before she hit the ground. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly, but she whispered in his mind, "Safe. With you." Those words hit harder than any weapon. David held her close, hammer still ready in his other hand. He knew now that their connection was more than chance. It was survival. It was fate. The hunters snarled again, regrouping, their red eyes furious. But David and the girl stood together, their bond stronger than fear. In that moment, the man who only wanted to fix his basement understood something powerful. She was not just an alien, not just a mystery from the stars. She was someone who needed him and in return gave him strength he never knew he had. And in the glow of the pod, their bond of trust became unbreakable. The basement felt like a battlefield trapped in silence. Dust floated in the glowing blue light of the pod, and the hunters circled slowly, their red eyes burning like coals in the dark. David stood tall with the alien girl leaning against him, her strength fading after using her power, but her hand still clutching his as if he was her anchor. The air was thick, heavy with tension, the choice he had to make pressing on him like a weight too large to carry. The hunters growled, their guttural voices scraping against the walls. One pointed its claw at the girl, its meaning clear: hand her over, surrender, and they would let him live. David's throat tightened, the thought cutting into him like a blade. He glanced at the girl, her glowing eyes wide with fear, but also with something else: acceptance. In his mind, her voice whispered weakly, "If I go, you safe." The words made his chest ache. She was willing to give herself up to protect him. But David shook his head, his grip on her hand tightening. He whispered aloud, his voice cracking, "No, I won't let them take you." Leary. Hunters hissed louder, stepping closer. Their shadows stretched across the floor, claws dragging against the stone, sparks flying. The pod behind them pulsed brighter, as if urging him to act, to choose. The choice was clear now: life without her, or danger with her. David's heart pounded as memories of her voice rushed through him. Chosen, trust, safe. All the words she had shared with him in the silence of his mind. She was not just a stranger from the stars, she was someone who believed in him when no one else had. And now she was asking him, silently, if he would stand with her to the end. He straightened his back, lifted the hammer high, and stared into the burning eyes of the hunters. "I choose her," he said, his voice shaking but strong enough to fill the room. The girl gasped, her eyes shimmering, her trust in him glowing, brighter than the pod itself. The hunters paused, their snarls turning to rage. surprised that a human would defy them. One roared, lunging forward, claws slicing through the air. David swung the hammer with every ounce of strength, the crash echoing through the basement. The strike hit true, knocking the hunter back, its armor cracking deeper. Pain shot up David's arm, but he refused to drop his weapon. The girl's weak voice filled his mind again. Together. Her hand glowed faintly as she pressed it to his chest. A wave of energy surged into him, making his body feel lighter, faster, stronger. It was her gift. The last of her strength poured into him. The hunters hissed, all three rushing toward them, now their claws slashing like fire. David stood his ground, his hammer blazing with the glow that now wrapped around his arm. Every strike he made carried more than human strength. It carried their bond, their choice, their defiance. The basement shook with every clash, dust and stone raining from above. Still, he knew they could not fight forever. More footsteps thundered outside, heavier, closer, the pack gathering. If he stayed here, they would be buried under numbers too great to resist. He had to decide not only to fight, but to escape. David pulled the girl close, whispering against her glowing hair. "Hold on. We're getting out of here." Her faint smile pressed against his chest, her voice in his mind soft but certain. "With you. Always." And as the hunters roared again, filling the night with their fury, David made his final choice. Not surrender, not retreat, but to protect her with everything he was. The hunters roared in unison, their voices shaking the walls, their claws flashing with deadly light. David stood with the alien girl pressed close against him, his hammer glowing faintly from the bond they now shared. He could feel her weakness, her trembling body leaning against his side, yet in her eyes burned a light that refused to die. The basement trembled as more shadows appeared at the edges. The pack was gathering, surrounding, closing in. David's chest tightened. He knew this was the end if nothing changed. The girl's voice whispered in his mind, faint and fragile. "I can stop them." But her eyes dimmed, her breathing shallow, her hand pressed harder against his chest. He shook his head quickly. "No, you'll destroy yourself," he whispered, his voice cracking. The pod behind them glowed violently, the symbols racing faster than ever. It was reacting to her thoughts, pulsing like a heart ready to burst. The hunters snarled, stepping closer, their red eyes gleaming with hunger. David gritted his teeth, raising the hammer. But deep down, he knew this fight was beyond him. The girl closed her eyes, her voice filling his mind once more. Clearer now. "Trust me." Before he could stop her, her body glowed brighter, light rushing through her veins like fire. Her small form lifted slightly in his arms, her hair flowing as if caught in a storm. David reached out desperately. "Don't. Please don't," he begged. But it was too late. Her power awakened fully. A burst of energy exploded outward, blue light slamming into the hunters. The creatures screamed, their claws scraping against the stone as they were thrown across the basement. The walls cracked, dust pouring from the ceiling, the ground trembling under the force. David shielded his eyes, the light almost blinding. When he looked again, the hunters were scattered, their armor cracked, their red eyes dim. The pod had gone, dark, its glow fading as if it had given all it had to fuel her. And at the center of it all was her, the alien girl, floating slightly above the ground, her entire body wrapped in radiant light. She opened her eyes, glowing blue brighter than stars. The hunters tried to rise, but her gaze alone froze them in place. She lifted her hand slowly, and invisible force crushed the ground around them. The creatures shrieked, their strength no match for the storm she had become. David watched in awe and fear, his hammer slipping from his hand, the fragile girl he had held. The one who whispered weak words into his mind was now a being of power beyond anything human. But he could see it in her trembling form. Every burst of power was breaking her. Her glow flickered, her breathing grew weaker, yet she kept pushing. "No," David shouted, rushing toward her, his hands reaching out. He caught her shoulders, pulling her close, shouting above the roar of her power. "Stop! You'll burn yourself out!" Her glowing eyes met his, filled with sorrow, filled with love, and she whispered into his mind, "For you." Her light flared one last time, blasting the hunters backward in a wave of pure force. The basement shook violently, cracks splitting across the ceiling. The hunters howled in pain before stumbling toward the shadows, retreating at last. The glow faded, silence swallowing the chaos. And in David's arms, the alien girl collapsed, her light extinguishing. He held her tightly, his heart breaking, at the stillness of her small frame. "Stay with me," he whispered, shaking, his tears falling onto her glowing skin. Her faint eyes flickered open one last time, her voice barely in his mind. "Safe. Because of you." And then she went limp, the silence of the basement heavier than ever. David clutched her, surrounded by rubble, dust, and broken hunters fleeing into the night. He had seen her hidden power, the strength of a star burning inside her, but now he feared that power had cost her everything. And as he knelt in the ruins, he prayed that this was not the end, but only the beginning. The basement lay in ruins, cracks in the walls, dust floating like smoke, and silence heavy after the storm. David sat on the broken floor, his arms wrapped tightly around the alien girl, her small frame limp against him. Her glow was faint now, only a whisper of light pulsing under her skin. He shook her gently, his voice trembling. "Stay with me, please." His tears fell onto her face, shining against her silver skin. He had seen her unleash power beyond imagination, but the cost had nearly destroyed her. The hunters had retreated into the night, their red eyes fading into the dark. But David knew they would return. They would not stop until they claimed her. For a long moment he thought she was gone. Then her eyes flickered open, glowing faintly blue, her lips parted, and her voice reached his mind like the softest echo. "You stayed." David laughed through his tears, his chest aching with relief. "Of course I stayed." She tried to sit up, her body trembling, but he held her close. Her glowing hand touched his chest weakly, the warmth of her bond spreading faintly into him again. The pod behind them was silent now, its symbols dark, its strength gone. Whatever had once protected her had given all it had, and now it was only them. David looked into her eyes, his voice firm though his heart still shook. "We can't stay here, it's not safe." She nodded faintly, her thoughts whispering into his mind. "They will come back." The truth was heavy, but so was the bond they now shared. He squeezed her hand, his voice steady. "Then let them come. I'll protect you." Her faint smile lit the dark room brighter than the pod ever had. It wasn't just gratitude, it was trust, deep and unshakable. For the first time in his life, David felt like he had a purpose greater than himself. Not fixing basements, not living quietly, but protecting her. This strange, fragile beauty from the stars. He helped her to her feet, his arm around her steps weak but determined. The basement door creaked above, broken by the hunters, but beyond it lay the world. A world that had no idea what slept beneath its floors until tonight. A world that would soon know that aliens existed, and that one of them had chosen him. David glanced back once at the ruined pod. It had been her prison, her cradle, her shield. But now it was only empty metal. The true power was not in the machine, but in her, and in the bond that had tied her life to his. They climbed the stairs slowly, every step a promise that they would face whatever came next together. Outside, the night was quiet. Stars scattered, above like witnesses to their new beginning. The air was cool, carrying the scent of earth and rain. For the first time since finding the pod, David breathed deeply, feeling the weight lift slightly from his chest. The girl leaned into him, her glowing eyes reflecting the starlight. Her voice whispered softly in his mind. Home. The word struck him harder than anything else had. It wasn't just about safety. It wasn't just about survival. It was about belonging. David looked at her, then up at the endless sky, and he smiled. Whatever chased her, whatever war she had fled, none of it mattered now. She was here. She had chosen him, and he had chosen her, and no army of hunters would ever break that bond. In the ruins of a broken basement, he had unearthed not just a pod, but a life, a destiny, a forever. And as the two of them stepped into the night, their story truly began. Not as a man and an alien, not as protector and protected, but as two souls bound together. At the beginning of forever, the night stretched long, stars glimmering above the quiet earth. David walked slowly along the empty road with the alien girl leaning against him, her small frame wrapped in an old jacket he had thrown over her. She was weak, but her steps were steady, her glowing eyes watching the horizon with silent determination. Behind them, the house stood broken, its basement torn apart by secrets too heavy for ordinary walls. The world felt larger now, heavier, because David knew the truth. Aliens were real, they were here, and one of them walked beside him. He glanced at her, the girl who had called him chosen, and wondered how his life had changed in only a few days. He was no longer just a man renovating his basement. He was carrying the fate of someone who had crossed the stars. The road ahead was dark, but David's heart felt brighter than ever. She whispered faintly into his mind. Safe. Now? David shook his head gently. Not yet, they'll come again. Her hand tightened around his wrist, her trust deep and unshaken. They stopped near the edge of a forest, trees towering like silent guardians. The girl leaned against a trunk, closing her eyes for a moment. Her faint glow lit the shadows around them, fragile yet beautiful. David crouched in front of her, brushing dust from her hair, whispering, "You're not alone anymore." She opened her eyes, the glow softer now, and in his mind he heard a single word, promise. David nodded, his chest heavy but his voice firm. "I promise I'll protect you no matter what." Her faint smile was all the answer he needed. For the first time, she looked at peace, even with danger waiting in the dark. But the peace did not last. In the distance, the faint hum of engines echoed, low and predatory. David's body tensed, his hand instinctively tightening around the hammer still tucked into his belt. The girl's eyes widened, her weak voice whispering in his thoughts. They search. Through the trees, faint red lights blinked, scanning, moving closer. The hunters had not given up. Their shadows stretched across the forest floor like crawling fire. David pulled her close, whispering, "We have to move now." Her steps were unsteady, but she leaned into him, trusting him completely. They slipped deeper into the forest, branches breaking under their feet, the night alive with whispers of pursuit. David's mind raced. He had no plan, no weapons strong enough, but he had her trust, and that meant he could not fail. The girl clutched his hand, her faint glow guiding their way through the dark. Her voice trembled in his mind. They never stop. He stopped suddenly, turning to face her, his eyes steady. "Then neither will I," he said, his words sharp and certain. She looked at him for a long moment, and then nodded, her glow pulsing faintly stronger, as if his courage was feeding her. The bond between them had grown deeper, unshakable. Behind them, branches snapped, growls echoed, the hunters were closing in again. David's chest burned, but his spirit did not falter. The night was filled with danger, but also with something new, hope. Because he knew now that he was not fighting for survival alone. He was fighting for her, for them. They broke into a clearing where the moonlight spilled silver across the grass. The girl lifted her hand weakly, sparks of blue light flickering in her palm. She whispered in his mind, "Together." And David raised his hammer, his voice loud in the silent night. Together. The hunters emerged from the trees, their red eyes burning, their claws gleaming. The battle was not over. It was only beginning, but David's fear was gone, replaced with fire. Because whatever came next, he and the alien girl would face it side by side. And as the moon watched, from above their story stepped beyond survival. It was no longer about hiding or running. It was about standing, about choosing, about fighting for a bond stronger than fear. A new dawn had begun, and their forever was only just starting.